So when police officers are looking for evidence in a particular crime or something they're investigating, is it as easy enough to putting on a shopping list and having a look for it? Can you buy it from a garage sale? Sounds kind of fishy, but there was a question posed to us on another podcast. We'll look at that and a few other things in relation to that in this podcast here. Should be an informative one. Stick around, folks.
Misdemeanor site.
You are now tuned in to an informed state of mind.
The main takeaway is that this is not going to happen tonight. 2009, I made the decision to get out. Family, we got out.
All right, so welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to ISM, an informed state of mind. So, good friend of the show here, Shammer from the Gray Man Concepts podcast he's running over there. Fantastic. He's been doing it for about 4 years now, maybe a little longer. Quite a catalog of really great podcast. I'm going to certainly urge you to go over and check out that show there. I'm going to say that they were a little bit responsible for our show coming to life here again, and so we tip our hat in his direction for that. He did mention us, like I said, in one of his recent podcasts, and that one was titled "The NSA's Secret Market for Your Data." Again, great podcast. I learned a lot in there. And I think it's 20 minutes, I think a little bit inside of 20 minutes long. Definitely worthwhile going over there. I'm going to suggest that everybody's going to learn a little something about that. May make you feel a bit better, may not make you feel a bit better. But nevertheless, I think you should probably check that out. The question he had asked us, and he posed a question right to myself here, and we're going to go ahead and answer that. And I don't think, in order to answer the question, I think we're going to dive in a little bit deeper. We can probably make a whole cast of this, and I think that's what we're going to do. And I think this might just provide a little bit more information and let everybody kind of know why certain things are done a certain way and a little bit of insight. I'm going to say that this is not complete by any means, and this does not constitute as legal advice, as we'll call our disclaimer, I suppose, because I am not a lawyer. Okay, so that's very important. I've said it. You know what? Moving along. What we're going to do is we're going to play that clip from his show, and let's have a listen.
You can look this up, but there's, just like any search warrant, there's rules and guidelines in place to obtain certain sites of information, what you need a search warrant for, just like there's things you don't need a search warrant for. Okay, that's in the Constitution. Despite what people claim, it's very clear there's types of searches don't require warrants. Now, on top of that, though, what those don't cover is things that can be bought and sold. So, for example, and Luke, give me your thoughts on this, what I'm about to say, but here's something that just popped into my head. So you're a police officer who is doing an investigation on a guy for some reason, and he lives at this house. And let's say you're undercover for whatever reason, and you need a product. Let's say he has a cooler, right? A cooler you put ice and sodas and beers in. And this cooler, you knew, transported drugs, and the witness said that some drugs probably spilled out onto the cooler. Perhaps there's residue there you can test. And you're not getting anywhere, but let's say the guy let's say you go to the guy and because he's having a garage sale and ask if you buy the cooler. I don't know that you could buy that cooler, and then if you could do it in a legal way, make it part of that investigation. Like, would that be illegal? I don't know. But that's kind of like how this is going. Like, I guess it's a loophole. But there's a difference between obtaining information by virtue of a warrant versus by virtue of transaction.
Okay, so where do we start? We can say that some aspects of his question, I mean, in legal matters, police officers have specific duties when it comes to collecting evidence. There's no doubt about that. So let's break a little bit of that down, right? So we talk about collecting evidence. Police officers are not obligated to collect evidence in any particular specific manner or create custom material for disclosure. Therefore, we can say that their failure to do so does not amount to a failure to provide disclosure or impact the right to make full answer and defense. But what we can say is, though, police do have a duty to provide all relevant materials that's in their possession that they've used to formulate their case to the Crown for disclosure. Okay, so that's a really important piece there. And again, it needs to start right in order to end right. And so starting point would be just that. But we could say also this: there is a duty part of the Crown and the prosecution. And again, we're going to look at this from a Canadian standpoint. This is where I'm located and what have you. Well, this may be similar to the United States or other countries. But again, I can't stress it enough. You will have to look at your particular state or your province, because some things can be very particular. Okay, and we're going to speak of this on maybe a general federal basis, and which would be a countrywide basis to give it a little bit more context, I suppose. We can say as well, when the Crown becomes aware of relevant material in the possession of a third party, they should take reasonable steps to assist the accused in obtaining that material. Okay, and that would be a duty to the Crown to do just that. This duty does not require the Crown, however, to conduct the investigation that directly assists the defense, but it does aim to, we could say, bridge the gap between the first party and third party records. So when we consider officers' conduct related to the integrity of the investigation, or say even officer safety, police should be given a good deal of leeway. Which would bring us back to the question posed by Shammer and buying evidence at a garage sale. So what we can say is this: is police officers should not purchase evidence from a garage sale or any other source. Their role, of course, primarily is to investigate, gather, and preserve evidence in a legal and ethical manner, right? So in the context of police investigations, ethical considerations are going to play a crucial role in ensuring quite a few different things. Fairness, number one; justice, and creating the system working in the ways it should; and respect for the individual's rights, right? So to talk about some of those key aspects, what's involved with that? Well, we can start almost off of caseload management. All right, and then we can break that down a little bit further to say that that police officers are faced with heavy caseloads, and they're often faced with ethical dilemmas to some degree when deciding which cases to prioritize. Okay, and a lot of experience is going to really play a big role in this, right? So there's a few things that probably need to be considered with that. Not probably, they definitely need to be considered, right? Balancing the solvability of that particular case, the seriousness of the offense, and the rights of the victims, of course, is going to be very essential. Officers definitely should avoid biases, making sure that they ensure the equitable treatment, of all victims that could be involved, right? So we have to be very broad thinking to make sure that we're not excluding any potential victims in that case. One of the other things that we talk about in obtaining evidence is about lies and deception and tricks that maybe officers may engage in. Right? The question is it reasonable? Is it allowed? Right. So if we talk a little bit about that, we could say, well, it is a bit of a balancing act. There's no doubt. I mean, investigators must walk a pretty fine line between the tenacity or overzealousness that could pop up, or that feeling of it, just because they may need something or want something they feel is relevant or crucial to their investigation, does not mean they're entitled to it by any means needed or performed on their end. Right. So there absolutely is rules of engagement with that. So we must consider another aspect of it, and that would be what we could refer to as objective reflection, for instance. And as such, officers should consider how ultimately their actions are going to appear in the courtroom, right? And I mean all actions of that officer. That would encompass everything and anything they do and how they do it and how they come to the conclusion of doing it that way, right? What was the rationale? What was the deciding factors? And that's certainly quite important. So using what they consider permissible tricks, an example, undercover operations or posing as gangsters, for instance, to obtain confessions is allowed, but officers also must avoid creating or planting evidence, as an example, or leading a person to information. Leading is certainly something we want to stay away from in that sense, because it can cause a constitutional challenge later on, right? So you're talking about interviewing, questioning, or interrogating. There's a lot of factors to consider. First off, police officers are not allowed to use physical force or what we refer to as psychological coercion to get someone to talk during questioning. what we could say is the days of the rubber hose, at least for frontline policing or anything that I'm aware of, the days of the rubber hose and, protracted grilling under bright lights or waterboarding, anything of that nature, or what some would refer to as the phone book treatment. And if you're not sure what that is, maybe you can look that up. And severe deprivation maybe is another one to talk about too, and that's the one that comes to my mind. Those days are absolutely, and I would say pretty much over, because I would suggest that they probably did exist at some particular time. So, what we can't say is when officers are questioning individuals, they should minimize the length of the questioning, avoid leading questions, and especially disclosing details that are not publicly known. They definitely want to avoid threats of harm to that individual or others, as well as making, would say, promises, to them or to others. That's definitely another aspect. We want to stay away from the absolutely interviewers and interrogators of any sort should not lead the subject. I mean, they should be asking open-ended questions designed to, we could refer to as elicit the most accurate and detailed information as possible. We want it as organic as possible, and what we can get to that, the better, or the closer we get to that, the better. An interview should be conducted in a manner that encourages a productive exchange of information, and this will get us closer to having a win at the end of the day. And whether that's just to discredit somebody as being a major factor in the case, or to say, yeah, we're going to have to look a little bit closer at this, right? If that, to lay it as an example. We should probably speak to the transition point, I guess, for an investigator to move from interviewing a witness or a victim to detaining and questioning the person as a possible suspect. This should absolutely occur when real evidence is discovered. The investigator given reasonable grounds to the suspect that the person is involved in the event, right? So, this ensures that the questioning process remains objective and ethical. And ethical, of course, it's an absolute big deal. There's no doubt about that. And it should be a big deal, right? We want to focus on discovering the truth rather than merely obtaining a confession to a crime. And to me, that would be, that is our overall goal. And again, that's one of the pieces of the process that'll get it from the starting right to coming closer to making sure that it ends right. So there absolutely needs to be an emphasis on using an objective and ethical technique, right? Modern policing emphasizes measured, objective and ethical approaches to interviewing or questioning, and of course interrogation, and absolutely must avoid bias. So an officer should always remain impartial, considering how their actions are going to align with the legal standards and the ethical norms. So then this is an absolute. To assist in this, there is ethical decision-making frameworks out there to lean on, I'm familiar with the rapid evidence assessment matrix, and it comes in different forms, but it's going to get you to the same end, right? But it can provide a review of ethical decision-making frameworks that helps guide officers in their investigative practices. And again, the more standardized we can make this in line with current case law and best practices, the better. So again, I think even Canada, as far as the U.S., probably has a lot more work to do there. We could recap it and say that the ethical evidence gathering involves and maintaining a delicate balance, of course, between investigative, persistent, and respecting individuals' rights. Police officers have a duty to uphold ethical standards while pursuing justice at all costs, even if it means the case never makes it in front of a judge. And if it does, there will be challenges, and rightfully so, if it's not, pursued correctly. So taking what we just kind of talked about there, back to the question Shammer had posed in his podcast, we conclude a couple things, right? If an officer were to buy evidence from a suspect at a garage sale, it could raise serious ethical and legal concerns, my guess would be. All right, and it might compromise the integrity of the overall investigation and potentially affect the admissibility of the evidence in court, right? And that's certainly going to be very important. So instead, police officers should follow a proper procedure, for seizing and documenting evidence during an investigation, whether that's a policy, again, whether this is a standardized approach for their department, province, or whichever the case is, right? But those proper procedures need to be followed. Again, it also needs to be in line with current case law and, of course, any other administrative law that comes to this, such as the Evidence Act of Canada, for instance. I mean, if they encounter evidence at a garage sale, they should probably handle it according to the established protocols and in line with current case law, making sure that it's all part and parcel. Well, what I can say is this, right? I mean, just to kind of put it plainly, I mean, if you're finding something at that, there is different ways to obtain warrants for that. So instead of trying to say, well, we're going to buy it and kind of bypass it that way, we could say, if it's that important to the and again, maintaining continuity of the product that you're seeing or the item that you're seeing. Like I said, this cooler, to me, it would behoove me just to go ahead, if I thought it was that crucial and I could have the reasonable grounds were there and I could articulate that to a judge and willing to sign to that. The judge may give me a telewarrant, for instance, which is an option, and it's a quicker way of being able to secure a piece of evidence. Will that actually hinder our investigation? Because maybe at this particular point it's very much undercover. We're still gathering a lot of intel. We're out in the observation standpoint and really don't want to make contact with the accused. That certainly could be a factor that needs to be considered. So, like I said, there's a lot of other factors there, but again, we need to make sure that any proper procedure for seizing and documenting evidence is maintained, and that's certainly very important. So before I get too far into this, I probably should recap and say that let's recap it. So police officers, we'd say, that have a specific duty when it comes to collecting evidence. There's no doubt. All right, there's a balance there with solvability, the seriousness of the offense, and the rights of a victim. And of course, this is all very essential. Right. Officers absolutely need to be impartial. They need to safeguard against bias, and emphasizes measured, objective, and all ethical approaches. And that's going to be absolutely key, right? In the very beginning, there's no doubt, right? And so that's just where it starts. But like we said, consideration absolutely needs to be given to those officers. Their conduct related to the integrity of an investigation, and including the officer's safety, right? That's another thing to be considered. And there needs to be, given a bit of a leeway there. Although the officers do have to provide all relevant material that's in their possession that was relevant to the case, to the Crown, for disclosure in the prosecution of that case. All right. And of course, disclosure is provided to the Crown by the police, and they put forth all their information, testimonies, will says, and then they need to also take that information now, provide that to the accused. All right. Not their game plan, but the information that's against the accused, right? So that's what they call disclosure. So, overall, this is kind of the process. So to answer the question, moreover, to say, hey, should I be buying a cooler from that? Because that's evidence that I need there. There's going to be a lot of different contributing factors. How far are we into this? Is it going to jeopardize going further in the case? These are things that might be contributing factors that we don't believe infringes upon an accused's rights or an individual's rights, but it's got to check all the boxes. So again, there's a whole bunch of things to consider on that. On that particular one, it depends. I'm going to say there's two definitive ways. We buy the cooler and we make sure that we articulate why we've done that to justify that, and making sure that, again, we haven't breached a right on this process, or you go through it's getting a warrant and seizing it. So that's those are the two main ones. That's it. Well, we thank you for the question, Shammer, for sure. Hopefully we've answered that in some kind of systematic format so that people can understand that, and hopefully everybody takes a little bit away from that bit of information. So, like I said, any questions, comments, concerns on that, reach out, give us a message. Two ways to do that. You go on the main channel, certainly, and you can leave a voice message, or you can reach out to us by email, and that's down in the show notes. Thanks again, folks. Take good care. Be safe. Stay remember. Echo, did you like the show? This has been a Rush Creek production.